should all be set. So we're just going to give ourselves an extra few minutes to get our lives in order. You guys know how it goes if you've been here before. So it'll be 2 more minutes before we actually get started. So thank you guys very much for your time and patience. I hope everyone is doing well this morning. There it goes. All right. No, I don't want. Okay, let's see. One moment before I do. Let's make sure that this is off because I do not like this. Yeah. Okay, that's good. All right. You think I know what I'm doing by now, but clearly it is still a work in progress. Anyways, that should all be set. I do not want any stars being sent on this one. We're just giving it a minute for people to hop on. I hope you're all doing well and you guys have been enjoying migration season so far. At least I know at our store we've seen, or at least I've heard, a common yellowthroat outside as well as a few cedar waxwings that are kind of passing through. So hopefully you're still paying attention to your yard and the various birds you might be seeing this season, which is always a good time. And I hope you guys are having a good day and a good weekend. So we will have a lot of stuff to talk about today. It might be a little dull in comparison to other presentations, but hey, they can't all be winners, right? So, yeah, good morning, guys. Let's see, 8 9. I thought I had words. I don't. They're set and ready to go for the presentation, so we're just gonna let that ride for a second. But okay, so that is all good. All right. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and jump right into it because it is 8:30. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me today. My name is Jolene. I'm a certified songbird feeding specialist with Wild Birds Unlimited of Concord. And today we will be talking about creating a habitat for your birds. So this one is going to be a little information heavy. If you guys have any questions during the presentation, definitely feel free to leave a comment. You should be able to. I don't believe STARS is on, so that should not be a problem. But yeah, definitely leave a comment. And if I do not know the answer to specific questions, I will definitely come back with an answer at a later time as well too. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and just jump right into it as well. So when I talk about creating a habitat, it's important to recognize why that is so crucial and why there's such a drive for creating a habitat these days. Something that I do want to focus on is that in 2019, there was a study that was done using 48 years of data as well as 11 years of complex analysis with radar station data. Basically, a lot of the radar stations that can focus on our weather and show us what's coming can also record large movements of birds' migration. So there's a lot of data and information people have used, and in 2019 they found that North American songbird populations have dropped by 30% since 1970, and that's just 1970. We don't know how much has changed prior to that. So almost 3 billion birds, individuals, have been lost since that time. Birds themselves are a great indicator of environmental health and ecosystem integrity. If you're ever on a walk out in the park or out in the woods, one of the first types of wildlife you may pay attention to are our songbirds. They're bright, they're colorful, they're very loud, they sound beautiful, and they definitely get our attention. So they're oftentimes, that's kind of why of the different wildlife that we can pay attention to, birds get such a positive reputation, is because they are one of the ones that we greatly enjoy and they're very easy for people to see. So you can imagine if there is a habitat where birds are no longer present or there's not as much variety, that if the birds are struggling, there are many other types of wildlife, such as amphibians or reptiles or other mammals that we don't see that are struggling much more. So they're a great indicator species that we can rely on to kind of explain what's going on. And there are many different causes in decline. Habitat loss is by far the biggest. It is not hard to go out and see towns being expanded or different habitats being lost without any type of care being given to improve it in the future or in different locations. Cat attacks and window collisions are also large issues as well. That's why lights out campaigns can be very helpful during migration season, and why having your cats indoors or having catios or providing harness training for your cats can be very helpful. They also have a bacteria cats do in their mouth called Pasteurella, where if they do go hunting and they do manage to snag a small mammal or bird, that bacteria can be life-threatening and kill them within a few days. So if your cat ever brings you any type type of gift that's still alive, it's very important to call a wildlife rehabber because they need special treatment before they can be released out back into the wild. So these are all very important things that we have found over the years that show us our songbird populations are in danger, and there are different things that we need to do to help fix that. And habitats are something that do not just sprout up overnight. They take time and care in order to give the right habitat for our songbirds. So the National Wildlife Federation in the 1970s actually made something called a wildlife habitat certification that people could do to help encourage and educate others on ways to kind of provide more habitat for the wildlife in our area. This certification has 5 checkpoints, such as food, water, cover, places to raise young, and sustainable practices that help further support the wildlife in our area. So songbirds, pollinators, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, all those things can kind of help them thrive in an area where maybe they couldn't before. The certification has a $25 fee / donation to the National Wildlife Federation that basically goes towards helping the NWF continue their mission to kind of help educate and inform people on conservation and their purposes as well. Not only that, but when you certify your yard, it has a few different benefits for you as well. Of course, it replenishes resources for wildlife, which is something that we love. It improves the diversity and has a real thriving system, which is a lot of fun. It reduces urban temperatures. A lot of greenery often absorbs heat versus in urban cities where the colors of the city actually reflect heat, making it hotter. So that actually helps reduce those urban temperatures. It also reduces water runoff and pollution. Oftentimes when yards are treated with various types of fertilizers, pesticides, insecticides, if there's oil or gas on the roads, when it rains, a lot of that stuff can go very far if there's not a lot of barriers, such as different types of plants to kind of help absorb or reduce that pollution spread. Not only that, but you get a personalized certificate and you get a 1-year membership to the National Wildlife Federation and their magazine, as well as 10% off NWF catalog merchandise. There's a few other benefits to this as well, but those are overall some of the major benefits that you get with actually certifying your yard. And even if you don't choose to certify your yard, following these checkpoints can help provide a lot of support for your wildlife as well. Basically, during this presentation, we'll be going over those 5 checkpoints. And if you've never seen it, there is actually a wildlife habitat certification checklist online that you can look for. It's a PDF file that has a lot of the information that we'll be going over today. So if you have any questions, you can always check that out, or we also have copies of it at the store. So in regards to the food category, this one is pretty straightforward. In this food category, you need to have at least 3 different types of food, and this can cater to whatever species you're more interested in assisting. So for some of you, it might be more of a pollinator garden, so you might want things such as nectar or pollen, different types of native plants or host plants for caterpillars and other pollinators that you enjoy. For those of us that are interested in a lot of our songbirds, maybe having different types of insects or seeds or berries or fruit can be very helpful too. This category is going to have a lot of investigation. If you don't know much about your yard, you're about to get very acquainted with it. Not only can wildlife habitats be certified in your own yard. It can be if you have a smaller balcony that you have set up with these types of things. If you're working with your school or town or various locations, you can have a wildlife habitat certified anywhere as well too. Also, one last thing is this certification is often self-proven. So nobody's going to come over into your yard and look and be like, ah, yes, you followed these 3, but not this one. So you need to do this before I can come back. Basically, it's self-proven. So as long as you feel that you have hit all the requirements, you can go ahead and certify your yard as well. So that being said, with the different food types, just depends on who you want to cater to. It's going to take a little bit of investigation of your own yard if you haven't done it before. So different plant ID books, or even using the, like I have a Google Pixel, so I use Google Lens on my phone to give me a general place of where to start as to what that plant ID could be, and then kind of double checking that and confirming that's what I'm looking at. So you can have different strategies. There's also different plant ID apps as well too if you're just getting started as well. So lots of different strategies here. For those of us that feed our birds, you can substitute natural sources with a bird feeder. However, in order to do that, you need to make sure that you clean and disinfect your feeder regularly. So they recommend 1 to 2 times a month to clean your feeders, depending on if we're dealing with heavy, well, right now we're dealing with rains, so checking out and making sure you don't have any mold growth or there's not a lot of buildup in those feeders is important now. But when you're cleaning them, you want to use soap and water. You can leave them to sit in a bucket or a bin, let them soak, scrub them out, and then sanitize them with 1 part bleach to 9 parts water, or 1 part white vinegar to 4 parts water, and then just rinse them off and then let them dry and they're good to go. So making sure you're maintaining those can be very important because oftentimes different diseases like salmonellosis, aspergillosis, conjunctivitis can all spread through contact with a bird feeder as well. Let me see. Another thing to note while you're kind of investigating your yard too is not every plant is going to bloom or fruit at the same time. So you have some that'll specialize more in spring or summer or fall or maybe even early winter. So getting a good understanding of the plants in your yard can help you better determine how to support your wildlife throughout the year versus a big boom during one season and maybe less to offer in others. But again, depends on what you have available and what you can utilize in your yard as well. Something I wanted to mention as well with host plants. These are plants that are essential to a butterfly or other insect's life cycle. We know a little bit about host plants if you've ever heard of a monarch butterfly. Their milkweeds are essential to their life cycle. That's where they lay their eggs. That's where those eggs turn into caterpillars and where they eat. That's where they will form a chrysalis and eventually become a butterfly as well too. So that, and they only utilize milkweeds. So that is the host plant for that individual. Other species of butterflies utilize different types of host plants, and these look like a bunch of different things. So don't think you just need to have your smaller blooming flowers, because there's many different types of plants. So tulip trees, wild black cherry, carrots, dill, clovers, alfalfa, oaks, black walnuts, different types of trees and shrubs and smaller plants provide different types of host plants for different species. So take a look and see if the plants in your yard are actually host plants that you may not have realized. It's sometimes a lot easier than you may think to see those certain types of species connections as well. Water is a very straightforward checkpoint. This, you just need one different type of, or one water source, whether it's a bird bath or a seasonal or year-round pond. Obviously, a year-round source of water is great, but seasonals can be very effective as well. If it is something that is consistently there and during a certain time of year, wildlife like songbirds or mammals will know to revisit that area or keep it kind of marked in their head as an option to go for when it's available. Water gardens are essentially ponds. Rain gardens I'll talk about in the next slide since I have an example of it there. Butterfly puddling stations also qualify. So again, if you're focused more on your pollinators, puddling stations are literally just a small dish with a different soil, some small rocks or little bits of gravel that the insects can kind of perch on, and basically making sure that soil stays damp so that the insects can kind of drink the water and absorb any of the minerals that are available to them as well. So basically keep that in mind as you're looking up different options there too. And of course, if you live in an area that has a spring, lake, river, stream, or ocean literally right across the way, you are allowed to utilize that as well as a water source. Now, cover is very kind of straightforward, and it doesn't need to be a large area, but it does need to be a protective area. Cover is essentially shelter from weather and other predators. You need at least 2 forms of cover available, whether that's small ground cover like clovers or kind of lower plant growth. Bramble patches, shrubs, thickets, brush or log piles can all be very helpful too. If you've ever seen the songbirds in your yard kind of go from the feeders and then fly to the shrubs, or those areas where they're well hidden and protected, are great options as well. Rock piles or log piles are also great. I will say keep in mind when you're offering these types of cover, many different wildlife will take advantage. So I know some of us aren't always comfortable. I love snakes, but some people are not comfortable with snakes. Log piles are something that they will utilize. So if you want to offer something like that for your other wildlife, but know that certain ones may still check it out, just have it further away from the house in a location where you are kind of comfortable with that being. So keep in mind, you're going to have other wildlife always investigate these locations. Meadows or prairies with taller grasses are great for smaller mammals like rabbits or other things to kind of go into and hide. Mature trees obviously provide great perching points for the birds, especially during storms, and evergreens never lose their leaves, so they're great for many different types of birds to hide, especially during the wintertime there. Dead perennial stems that are 12 to 18 inches longer are great for overwintering insects. So certain ones like moths, spiders, or wasps may actually hibernate over over the winter season in those areas. So leaving those stems available for insects that are very beneficial to the yard, whether they take out pest insects or potential pollinators themselves, can be very helpful for your yard in the next season. Roosting boxes are a little bit different from nest boxes. The opening of these boxes is located at the bottom, and oftentimes there are perching points set up in the box, so nobody has to be right on top of each other. This is a great place for birds to take shelter, especially when the weather is pretty bad as well. So keep in mind, there's many different ways to tackle cover. Now, something that kind of overlaps with cover is places to raise young. This is basically areas where wildlife can engage in courtship behavior, mate, and raise their young successfully. Again, in this area, you need two different types of checkpoints in order to have places to raise young. A lot of these can overlap with cover, so if you do need to kind of count them both in the same category, you can. However, the more variety that you offer, the more diversity your yard will support. So the more things that you can kind of check off, the more variety you will have. But again, you're working with what you have, and you can always build up in the future as you kind of continue as well. Dead trees are a great option for a lot of our cavity nesting birds. Woodpeckers are primary cavity nesters, which mean they excavate their own cavities in order to raise their young. They do not use the same cavity every year, so oftentimes they will they will excavate a new one a different year. That old cavity is very effective for secondary cavity nesters, like bluebirds, chickadees, titmice, some nuthatches as well. These birds will essentially utilize those old cavities for themselves. So dead trees are a great option for a variety of birds to nest in. Obviously, some dead trees can be in very bad locations. So if there's one a little bit too close to the house that you need to get rid of, consider maybe cutting it halfway so it's no longer a threat to falling down on something important, but still providing some support for the wildlife in your yard. Once again, you can have areas like dense shrubs or thickets, meadows or prairies, ponds or water gardens, animal burrows. Nest boxes are a great option as well too. Songbirds nest from March to August, so they will utilize those nest boxes. Bluebird boxes are a great option for not just bluebirds, but again, chickadees, wrens, titmice, occasionally nuthatches sometimes, but it depends on the species. Those host plants for caterpillars will just kind of tick off a lot of different boxes in this category, and again, those hollow stems. One thing I will mention is fallen leaf layers can be very helpful. Oftentimes when we have those leaf layers, there can be a lot of insects that either have kind of set up shop for overwintering or potentially kind of remain in the ground until temperatures get warmer. That leaf layer can help provide a lot of protection for them until their life cycle finishes. So oftentimes when we get into the spring season, where we're very excited to start working out in the yard and getting things settled, it's important to leave those fallen leaf layers until days are consistently 50 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. So I would at least give it a few weeks before you actively start raking up those leaves or shifting them into different areas, unless you're like super gentle about it. But for the most part, that 50 degrees is that threshold where a lot of beneficial insects will start waking up and kind of continuing that life cycle. So if we disturb that too early, we threaten their chances of survival and making it into the next season. So again, I know leaves are something of a contention for some people, so you don't necessarily need to leave all the leaves in your yard, but dedicate a certain area where you don't touch those leaves and you give those beneficial insects some time to kind of wake up and continue to do their thing. Now, this is the part that can be a little bit intensive, I find. Sustainable practices can have a lot of different options, so I'll try and explain as much as I can without it being overwhelming. So with sustainable practices, there's 4 different categories, and let's see if I remember them off the top of my head. We have soil and water conservation, reducing non-native species, reducing pollution, and reducing, reusing, and recycling. what the certification recommends is that you utilize at least 2 of these 4 categories required. So you could focus a little bit on soil and water conservation and also kind of preventing those non-native species. You would need to do 1 or more from both of these 2 categories, and overall it can be very simple, so it depends on what works best for you and what you feel would best benefit your yard. So first off, one of the categories is soil and water conservation. Helping with anything in this category reduces runoff, which again, we talked about that pollution spreading if there's not enough plants to kind of help reduce that. It helps maintain watersheds, so areas that are by streams or ponds or areas that kind of go from rivers into larger bodies of water. It makes it so that you're not continuously losing soil on those edges, and we're able to maintain the shape and watershed of those issues. Less erosion, essentially. Again, helps sustain those wildlife habitats and improve soil quality. A lot of the issue here is oftentimes erosion, which that topsoil layer can have a lot of nutrition, but when it rains and there's nothing to keep it in place, it'll take all of those nutrients and just kind of keep it going. A primary example of some of this runoff as well is oftentimes in many places with farmland, when a lot of fertilizers or other types of nutritional substitutes are utilized, if it rains, those can often go into the nearby rivers or streams and exit into larger bodies of water. When it enters those larger bodies of water, something that can occur is an algal bloom, where green algae kind of grows and absorbs all of the oxygen in the water. When that happens, it chokes out the oxygen that other wildlife cannot use. So a lot of fish can have die-offs or things like that because of this alteration or shift that occurs because of that lack of prevention as well too. So that's just kind of a very large example, but just showing how that can impact things as well. So with this soil and water conservation category, there's definitely a lot of different things that you can utilize, and you just need to do one of these practices to check off the soil and water conservation, but doing more can never hurt. Xeriscaping or dry landscaping isn't one that's really utilized here. It's more often used out west or in areas where drought is common or less water is a frequent occurrence. So this is landscaping with plants that do not require a lot of water. Planting densely or having a planted shoreline will help kind of keep the edges of streams or rivers in place so it doesn't continuously kind of expand and spread. Rain gardens are not necessarily a water pond, right? They are areas where you have a lot of runoff from like the house or the road, and you have these giant puddles that form in your yard that just kind of sit there for a while until it's eventually goes into the soil after sometimes a few days. Rain gardens are areas that are set up where you have plants that are very good at absorbing water that can sit in certain areas. So it doesn't look necessarily like it does anything with water, but oftentimes you can have water collect here, and the plants are great at absorbing that extra water and kind of reducing that runoff or erosion that can occur in there as well too. So keeping that in mind is another alternative depending on what your yard looks like after it rains. Limiting water use, which can also be used by like capturing rainwater from a roof, are great ways to kind of reduce the amount of water that is utilized. If you have a lawn that you take care of, making sure you're not watering it in the middle of the day where a lot of that water can evaporate can be helpful, either doing it in like the morning or in the evening when the temperatures are cooler. Using a drip or soaker hose for irrigation, as sometimes when you decide to like water your lawn or anything like that and it's super dry, that water doesn't always absorb into the soil as easily, so it can puddle first and potentially evaporate if it's too hot. Drip or soaker hoses essentially make it so that the water is slowly fed into the soil, keeping it moist through most of the time that it is there and easier to absorb. Reducing erosion is essentially through methods of like maybe using mulch or kind of creating those barriers where obviously the soil won't be taken away. Planting densely in certain areas to reduce that erosion is helpful as well. And leaving leaves in garden beds around trees and shrubs can also create a barrier between the topsoil and any rain that starts to hit. So that also provides very good options as well. And good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me so far. I really appreciate it. So these are all different strategies in the soil and water conservation category that can be utilized. Controlling non-native species is definitely a tricky one if you've never dealt with them before. It's one that I'm currently dealing with at home because I really want to see this one improved. But basically, this involves removing non-native plants and animals from your habitat. These types of non-native plants can spread quickly and reduce species diversity, and it often can be very deadly to native populations. One very common example of this is a kudzu infestation. If you guys have ever seen kudzu, honestly, I can drive down the highway and see areas where it chokes out pretty much any plant that could try and sustain itself there. Other things like honeysuckle, Chinese privet, Chinese wisteria, gosh, tree of heaven, different types of plants that are not native to this population or area can spread too fast and reduce that variety. It's also important when you go to different nurseries that you're investigating what plants are actually native. You would be surprised as to how many nurseries provide plants that are from different locations, because a lot of people love the ornamental factors of them, how easy they can grow, which is again that concern of those non-native plants, and just kind of the concerns that they do not support our native populations as well, because they definitely don't support as much of that. For example, Bradford pears are an invasive species. They don't contribute anything to any of the wildlife we have except maybe some shelter. Other than that, they have nothing that the wildlife can actually utilize. So I know some states have things in place where they're like, yeah, if you chop down a Bradford pear, we'll give you a native plant instead. So there's different things that are available to kind of counteract that as well. Different things, like if you've seen Japanese beetles can be a big issue. Emerald ash borers are also a problem for our ash trees. And if you've ever gone to the northeast area, stopped at a rest stop, and checked out the little corkboard signs that they have, sometimes they have things warning against insects like the lanternfly, which is slowly increasing its range and becoming an issue for a lot of stone fruits or grapes, which can greatly impact that industry and not in a good way. So that's why it's so important to kind of keep different non-natives under control or completely removed if at all possible. Certain invasive insects are also a reason why firewood cannot be carried over state lines unless it is heat treated, because it is a very easy way for different types of insects to quickly spread if those things are not managed. Reducing lawn areas is also very beneficial to this category as well. Lawns were a big thing back in the 1800s. The way they got started were people that had like larger castles and properties and status eventually realized, hey, I can hire people to manage my property and make other people realize I have a lot of status and money. So that's kind of how they got started, and eventually it just kind of came over here, and it was one of those things where it was a part of the American dream. You know, you have the house, the picket fence, the dog, the nicely well manicured lawn, but really it's also a native dead zone. There is nothing that our wildlife can really benefit from small cut grass. So reducing lawn areas, because it still does look very nice in certain areas, and still providing either natural areas to grow in certain sections, can be beneficial in general for either insects or birds or different types of mammals and things like that as well. In this category as well, there is something called practicing integrated pest management, which is essentially, instead of looking at a weed and going, oh, I'll just grab some pesticide to take care of this, it basically means looking again at the item that you are dealing with to monitor it, identify what it is, and implement different strategies to take care of it, and evaluating how well that worked. There's different strategies in this category, and honestly, it's going to sound sometimes very common sense-like, but sometimes we don't always realize that these are options. Cultural management essentially means looking at the plant that you are trying to grow and finding the best timing to plant it, rotating it with additional crops in order to reduce the pests that might be there, removing the weeds around it so that the pests cannot constantly badger it in case they thrive in those weeded areas, providing trap crops where essentially you grow a smaller portion of that plant earlier, which maybe lines up with that pest activity, so all the pests focus on that trap crop while your other crop is growing a little bit later. And of course, you can also treat those trap crops in order to remove that pest as well. So that requires knowing a lot more about the plant that you are working working on and the best ways to kind of sustain it in that area. Mechanical management is basically using tools such as hand picking the pest out of the way, using traps. So I know some people do like beer traps for slugs. Barriers, sometimes like aluminum foil, can be utilized for certain plants. If you have different types of eggs that are growing or aphids that are growing on plants that you don't want them to, using water sprays to remove that can also be utilized as well. Biological management can be a little difficult with timing, but essentially means using predators or organisms that occur naturally in that area. So ladybugs or praying mantises can often be a very common one that people will get more of to release in their yard to take care of things such as aphids. This can be a little tricky because the timing can be difficult if you're not used to doing it. So you want to do your research there. But there's many different types of insects that can be utilized in removing pests that you do not want. Lastly, chemical management can be utilized. It's one of those things where sometimes it is just easier, especially if you are dealing with invasive or non-native plants. Herbicides, insecticides, and pesticides all follow in this category. Make sure that when you utilize it, you read the label to ensure it is for the proper pest. Different chemicals react for different plants. So follow the instructions to a T. If you are going to use it, do not use it in a period where it is going to rain tomorrow, because again, then we're concerned about that runoff that can occur from using these chemicals. And honestly, with many people that just do kind of like the standard overarching spray style, that can be, goodness, if you don't follow the instructions, it can be very harmful to other wildlife if it is used inappropriately. As someone that's done a little bit of work in wildlife rehabilitation, I have seen the outcome of birds that are caught up in chemical sprays, such as neurologic symptoms and a very hard recovery time to improve their livelihood as well. So it's very tragic to see that if it's not managed correctly. The third type of sustainable practice is reducing pollution. So again, eliminating those chemical pesticides or fertilizers due to the fact that they can cause poisoning if they are used inappropriately. They modify the habitat and the food resources. So chemical fertilizers often kind of bleach the soil of nutrition. They basically kind of slam it with a lot of the different things that plants need, but it makes it harder for that soil to retain that nutrition. So you kind of have to keep using the fertilizer in order to sustain things. And again, not following the instructions can lead to soil, air, and water pollution. You can turn off outdoor lights at night. We always recommend this during the fall and the spring season as well, during migration, so as not to confuse the birds that are there. Another example of this is if you're on the coast, a lot of sea turtles will hatch at night, so sometimes they will get confused by city lights if we're not careful, and they will go the opposite direction instead of following the moon towards the ocean. You can also replace outdoor lights with amber-colored LED bulbs. People have found that amber colors are less attractive to nighttime insects, so they're less likely to kind of be confused and bombard those LED bulbs as well, so that can be very handy too. And of course, eliminating or replacing gas mowers with garden tools that are electric or hand-powered, just to reduce emissions there as well. Lastly, reducing, reusing, or recycling, something that we have all heard for a very long time, can be a very effective sustainable practice as well. In this case, composting kitchen and garden waste is a great strategy here. It can be managed indoors or outdoors responsibly, which is fantastic. You can usually do small areas so it doesn't smell or anything like that there. Garbage disposals, I will say, do not help. Oftentimes when you put it down the garbage disposal, that water is filtered and the waste is just thrown into a landfill, so we're kind of back to where we started. Eliminating the use of plastic weed lines. This is an easy one if you don't utilize these, but essentially a lot of people will use plastic weed lines. There is no oxygen or water transfer in this area. It disrupts the life cycle of many pollinators, and honestly, weeds eventually grow on and through it anyways. Being used as a weed liner is not its original purpose, and it just provides more plastics into the environment, and it's honestly not super helpful. You can use leaves as a natural mulch. So again, if there's areas where you don't want your leaves available, feel free to mulch them up and put them in areas that can be beneficial to you. That way you don't have to go out and buy a ton of mulch when you have it right there. Cleaning and reusing garden pots, or repairing or borrowing garden tools before repurchasing. Oftentimes in this day and age, we're not necessarily taught, but it becomes easy where if something's broken, we'll just go, oh, I'll just buy a new one. But it doesn't hurt to kind of check out the different things and saying, hey, is this a piece that can get repaired so it doesn't cost as much to just buy a new one? and is it easy to do so? So definitely keeping that in mind would also follow a category under reduce, reuse, and recycle. So again, there's those 4 options in sustainable practices. You just need to pick 2 of them and then just do one of the different points under both of those categories as well. With that being said, if you're kind of still getting used to things or still figuring out where to start, I will include different links in the description of this video as well. I will include the study that was done in 2019, so you guys can take a look at that if you're interested. It is a scientific paper, so have fun with that if you choose. If you're looking at native plants and aren't really sure where to start, there are a few different resources. NWF has a native plant finder that helps you find different host plants or other things that would be beneficial in your yard or location. Audubon Native Plant Database has best plants for your location to help your songbirds. There is a native plant nursery directory for our, in North Carolina, the best native plant nurseries that are in the local area. And then there is a nonprofit that I have found recently called Wild Ones that has 36 different has different chapters in 36 different states that have a compiled list of native plant garden centers and nurseries for each state as well too. We do have one in the Charlotte, Piedmont area, but if you live in a different state, it doesn't hurt to check out the resources that they have to offer as well too. So they focus on outreach and education to help people figure out the best ways to incorporate native plants in their yard. If you've heard anything about NC State, they have a great extension publications that provide different resources such as landscaping for wildlife, butterflies, managing backyards for birds and urban habitats, and just the best way to incorporate your yard with different styles of plants. And if you would like to certify your yard, you can go to the NWF. I'll have a link in the description as well that kind of shows how Wild Birds Unlimited sponsors these guys too, because we do have a few different things to offer as well. If you choose to certify your habitat through July 31st, there is a promo code WBU20 that gives you 20% off your habitat certification. Again, that certification fee / donation is just $25, but you can get 20% off that, especially if you're just kind of trying to get started and see how it goes. For those of you that have listened to this presentation, it was a lot, I am sure, but thank you very much for bearing through it. If you plan on coming into the store today to shop, I do have a coupon code for $5 off a purchase of $25 or more. Coupon code is Habitat, so feel free to use that and mention it at the counter today, or use it through a phone order as well too. There is a second viewing of this presentation at 11 if you guys feel somebody would be interested in this, and I will also be posting it to our YouTube channel as well, Wild Birds Unlimited of Concord, NC. So if you know somebody that's definitely interested, does not have a Facebook and isn't in the area, you can always send this their way in case there are some resources that you feel they could utilize as well. So with that being said, that is all I have to offer on this topic. Again, I'm not much of a plant person. I'm more of a bird person, so there will be different things that I may not know as much about or may not have certain resources for. But hopefully I've given you guys a better idea of where to get started, especially when figuring out the best way to incorporate your habitat to better support your wildlife, your songbirds, your pollinators, and all that stuff as well too. So thank you guys so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys have a great day, and I will see you next time. Bye!